Good day, welcome to another Empires of Apocalypse instructional video. This one will be for the next portion of our sequence of play. The previous video was for the preparation phase. Now we're going to move to the active side action segment. So we have resolved initiative. Now the active side, the person with the initiative initially, starts their reorganisation phase. This is the video for today. After that we'll start that person's naval phase. That will be for another video. So the reorganisation phase has 6 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first part, it's general kind of like administration preparation for the upcoming activities in the turn. You have flip headquarters, remove markers, then you have supply checks, then you repair hits. That's kind of like bringing in replacements. You have strategic rail movement, as it were. Aircraft can rebase, and then engineers finish installations that they are building. Now I will go into these each in detail. So we start with 7.1.1, flip headquarters and remove markers. What this means is that if a headquarter had in the previous turn supplied its point value in combat, then it would, so for example, if this headquarters unit had supplied its combat value in combat as a bonus, it would have to flip itself on this side, so its value's gone down to 0. This is to remind you that this can only be done once a turn. So at this point you would flip that unit back, so the headquarters is again available for supplying his combat bonus. Notice his movement bonus is reduced without that, and also but his commander points are not. Though about command points, I think that's irrelevant, because those command points are the number you have to roll equal to or less on d6 to supply that combat bonus. So anyway, that's flipping the headquarters, quite simple. And the other points would be removing markers. So I'm just going to illustrate what's going on using my game in play at the moment. Here we have the Chinese-Japanese limited war situation. Chiang Kai-shek headquarters needs to be flipped, as I just told you. There we go. That's that job done. There's 2 headquarters on the Chinese side. This one doesn't need flipping, so he won't be. Mao will not be flipped. Then the other point is remove markers. Now this is a hypothetical situation because I don't actually have this situation in my game, but this is a marker here. Now what it denotes is that under there's a tank unit that has been withdrawn from the front line and has been upgraded. The details of how that happens will be given in a later video, but basically this is the old tank unit, a 2-2 unit. I hope we've got a good, reasonable focus there. So the 2-2, the marker is removed, as the phase instruction says. You remove that tank, and underneath here is your upgrade, which was sitting waiting. So that's a 3-2 tank unit. So that's flipping headquarters and removing markers, getting your upgraded units. It could be an infantry or a tank unit, and also I think, yes, aircraft can be upgraded too. Okay, so that's the removing markers and upgrading units. Now we move on to the next point, which is the supply check. Now it's taken me quite a lot of preparation to get this into a position where I feel able to give it as an instruction, because it's not actually complicated in its operation during the game. The systems that you must perform are not sort of complicated and convoluted, but it is it's been difficult for me to get into kind of like a clear conception, because there's a lot of different types or variations of supply. So I will explain those bits in a moment, but the first point to note is that this is a supply check. Now, at this point, units might be found to be out of supply. If they are, then they are out of supply for the whole rest of their turn until you come at the end of the combat phase. You check out, that's out of supply units, for elimination. So just to illustrate on the board, if we were checking supply and just purely theoretically this unit was out of supply, you would turn him over the same way as you had done to the headquarters unit. You can see he has an out written on him. That means he's out of supply. So he still has attack, defense and a movement value, but you can see it's greatly reduced. In fact, it's quartered, but it can't go below 1. So that unit can still operate in the whole of the turn, but he is severely reduced in capabilities. So if you had checked the unit at the end of the combat phase, once he was out, well, sorry, just to clarify that is, you only, in this part of the phase, this is towards the end of the player turn, you only check out units. If units were in supply at the beginning of the turn, then you don't need to check for elimination now. So you don't put them out at this point. Say, for example, at the beginning of the turn now, in this reorganisation phase, you had this situation. You had this unit on a rail line which is leading to a city. So he's in supply. If this was a European map, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is 6 hexes away from a rail line which leads to a supply source. So he is out of supply. Now I'm just concealing that Australia because I'm pretending this is a European map where you if it was this Pacific map, he would be greater than 3 hexes away from the supply source. 1, 2, 3, 4, you see. But on a European map, it would be up here. So this unit is out of supply. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong type of unit. I picked a partisan unit who are never out of supply. Silly me. Okay, let's do this other tank unit. So this tank unit would be out of supply. And this tank unit is in supply. Now, pretend we have come to the end of the combat turn in this player's phase, and this unit had moved out of supply as well. In this second supply check, it doesn't matter, he's not out, so it's only this one we are interested. So this one would be checked at the beginning of this next player turn, but in the opponent's player turn he would be fine. This one, he would be checked for hits, and essentially roll d6, check, there's some modifiers, and if you get more hits than the defense strength, that yellow number there, that unit would be eliminated. So that's a basic note on when supply checks are done. Last point to make is re-exploitation. So we checked out units for elimination here. Then the exploitation phase would then start. This is right at the end of a player turn. The new player turn starts here with this red line. So essentially it's armour units and some infantry units that have been put in reserve can move and attack again in exploitation, but only if they are in supply. So that, I hope, was helpful parentheses just to get you used to the idea of the supply checks. This is one of the main supply checks in the turn. There are those other two, so sort of 3 supply checks. But this is the supply check where a unit can be flipped to its outside. So at this point of the turn, you check all units all units for supply. That's naval, air and land units. So now I'm going to go and discuss all the different types of supply. Now the first type of supply is regular supply. That is the kind of supply which I just, this is what you're checking for now. So at this point in the reorganisation phase, we're checking all units for supply. We're looking for regular supply. We're not looking for attack supply. This is only paid during the during the combat phase, when units attack, and something else I'll explain later. There's also supplementary or marker supply. Now this is supplementary instead of regular supply. Units that are not able to trace regular supply may be able to gain this. Then there's a final kind of supply called minor source supply, and that essentially is a minor type of supply which will save units from having to have that elimination check on out units at the end of the combat phase. Then apart from those four main types, each type has another kind of subtype of supply. So you'll see it looks quite complicated. As I said before, it's actually simple to perform an operation and to sort of do. You know, it's easy to check all these things. It's just that there's no sort of one blanket supply rule. There's these different ways of doing it. So I'll take each one in turn and go through them piece by piece. Now I'd just like to draw your attention to this little table here that I drew up. Obviously I don't know how this all appears on your screens, like how big your screens are and so forth when I zoom out, but basically this is a reminder of the phases and when supply is checked for. So we're in the reorganisation phase, so everyone checks for supply now. There's also combat supply, then there's also that post-combat, there's the check for units that are out supply, and then there's also the exploitation check for supply by exploiters. So these are the 4 points in the game term where supply is involved. The rules will say that you only check supply twice a turn, in the reorganisation phase and in the post-combat out units check. That's not quite true, because you do have to check exploitation units to see if they can move, but what the rules mean is that that's the only time where you might flip or otherwise affect the units by supply. In the exploitation phase, they just cannot exploit, so you don't flip the markers of the units, and you don't potentially give them any hits. An attack supply is not a check, because you just pay it. It's just a payment rather than a check, but I will get to that in a minute. So, regular supply. Now, this is supply from your national supply network. So, it is inexhaustible. You can supply all of your units, provided they are linked into that network. So, it requires no counters, no supply counters. There are supply counters in the game, and here are some examples of them. They have numbers on them, half-filled, some of them have backsides, some don't. Half-filled oil drums with numerals like 5 or 2 or 1. But you do not you do not use these counters for the regular supply. Regular supply requires a supply line. Now the supply line has to be, as I demonstrated earlier, it can be to a railroad, and then the railroad can be an infinite amount of length, to a city in the location's home country or a country aligned to it. Now this is all in the rules, very clearly stated. So don't worry if you don't catch everything as I say, it's in the rules. This is just to help you sort of get an overview of it. So it cannot be in colonies. So for example, the British Empire cannot the British Empire, it's a bit different. They can trace supply from their colonies. but for example, if you capture a nation in conquering it, it does not become a supply source for you. But nations that become allied to you you can trace this regular supply to their cities. Now the supply line goes from the city via a railroad of any length, and then on the European map you have to trace 5 hexes or less to that railroad. On the Pacific map that's 3 hexes or less. There's some slight exceptions to that. One is that in clear weather a road can act as a supply line, as a railroad. So for example, if we were over here in China, we've got very few railways, but you've got few roads. In clear weather these can act as supply lines back to cities, but there's a city here, that's Tibet, that's not strictly part of China. For example, this city here is not in China either, that's in Burma, no, that's in India. Okay, anyway, I don't want to muddle you, but the point is that if it's clear weather, this can act as a railway. If it's not clear weather, it does not act as a railway, but the road can add 2 hexes along your supply path. I'll see if I can get a clear demonstration of that for you. Okay, so for example, say, just for argument's sake, say Ankara is your supply city, and there's a railroad here of any supply length. I don't know about the straits there, that's another question to ask. But say that railroad is continual, this unit would be in supply. You would also be in supply up to 5 hexes away from that railroad at any point along it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he's in supply. It doesn't matter if it's mountains or anything, it's just 5 hexes. It doesn't matter about the terrain. Although weather does adjust it, weather will shorten your supply line, but that's something to look at separately. So that's the railroad. Now, if it's clear weather, then this would also act as a supply line. Can you still see what I'm doing? I've gone off your map. Yes, so if it's clear weather, the road acts as though it were a railroad. 1, 2, 3, 4, he could even be here and still be in supply. But say he's in there, then the next turn the weather changes to mud or anything else, winter. He's now out of supply. However, if he was on the road and there's the rail line here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he could be there in clear weather. No, let's do it up here. I think that's a better description. So here's the rail line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's in supply. Now, if it's not clear weather, he's still in supply because it's, although the weather does adjust it, but that's another point. Point is that if he's on the road, he can add 2 hexes to his supply length. So it could be 7 hexes of supply length to the railway, and he would still be in supply. I think you get the picture. I don't want to sort of babble too much and maybe confuse things instead of clarify them. Now, what constitutes a supply city? I'm assuming this is a city in your home country or an allied nation. This would normally be a supply city, inexhaustible supply to these units. This one's fine, this one's fine. But if a city becomes isolated, that is not quite the case. Now, isolation would occur by being in enemy zones of control. Enemy zones of control cut supply lines. So, for example, that would cut his supply line. And this might cause this chap to have a longer than 5 hexes supply line. That would be cut, of course. But the city cannot be a supply source if it is surrounded by enemy units and or zones of control. So if, for example, that happens, then this city could not supply these units. However, if the cutting occurred something like this, and assume, say, there's more. Assume I've gone off camera. Assume there's more units around here. As long as the city has 6 hexes around it that are clear, i.e. not in enemy zone of control, so let's say like that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not quite enough, because we wouldn't count its own hex. Okay, so say that. That one doesn't count, does it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So he's got 7 or so hexes that are clear of enemy control. It could be that, say, that one was there, so this hex counts because he negates his zone of control. But anyway, the point being that then that city would still count as a supply city, and say units nearby it would still be in supply, etc. Now, say we had a situation like this where the city can only summon up 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes that are free of enemy zones of control or enemy units. It could not be a supply city. It would be counted as isolated unless it was, say, a factory city, and it could trace up to 1 to 5 uninterrupted lines of supply to a resource hex. So, for example, if that was free, this resource hex down here, can you see that, would be too far away, but 1 up to 5 hexes away would be fine. And then it could still act as a normal national supply source. So regular supply is inexhaustible, but it requires a supply line. Now, one interesting point to note is that there's no overseas supply line in this name. What that means is that naval units, they require no supply while they are at sea. They do require supply if they're going to perform any operation except for a transfer from their port. So you don't check naval units for supply, but you do check their port. So this is another kind of supply, naval supply. The point to make here is that there's no sea supply lines, but if a port is out of supply, a Navy unit can only transfer from it. It can't perform any active missions like shore bombardment, invasions, etc., etc. So naval units themselves do not get out of supply, but the ports that they are based in do. The other point to make about naval supply, I mentioned it earlier, is that normally in attack supply, only attackers pay supply. But in naval combats, the defenders also pay for supply. So this point is kind of linked to the next kind of major supply. At which point we shall go over to that, and we shall now talk about attack supply. So this isn't the supply that we're checking for in the reorganisation phase. I just wanted to give you an overview of the whole supply situation in the game, just to put things in perspective. Attack supply you attack for in the combat segment. Now this requires counters. So these counters are bought with production, and they sit in your national pool off board on like a record sheet. They are paid for combat. You do not need to trace a supply line to pay for combat supply. I guess it's just an abstraction. It's assumed that if you're attacking, you need to spend one of these, and you brought it with you. You planned ahead. So simply for attack supply, every attack requires one of these points, and you would pay it out of your national pool there. And that was it. That's it. It will supply, as it requires no supply line. It's only for the combat phase, and it will supply all the units in that combat. Now, just to remind you that in Empires of Apocalypse, combat happens off map on a battle chart. So sorry, I just have to turn the light off because of the glare. But I think you can still see that. So you see each combat would be marked on the map with one of these. And then you would bring the defenders on and the attackers on. There may be aircraft here, there may be ships that are supporting from nearby. and however many units you have in the attack, you only pay 1 point of attack supply. That will suffice for the whole battle and for however many rounds that battle takes. Okay, so that is attack supply. Then the other point just to make about that at this point is that attack supply also allows you to supply a single unit with with regular supply. So in an attack you could supply up to 3 land units, a couple of aircraft, say, and a boat in attack supply with 1 point, or you could spend 1 point for one single unit to have an attack and to put it into regular supply. So what that would mean that at this point in the combat phase, say it was out of supply, you would put it into supply. At least it doesn't specifically say that in rules, but that's my understanding of what this would mean at this point. Because if you pay it at this point, it will have an effect later in the check for hits phase. So presumably you must flip it at this point to show it's now in regular supply. Then the attack supply brings us to a sort of related supply point in the supplementary supply. This really relates directly to regular supply, but the point is that sometimes units, when checked for regular supply, might not be able to trace a supply line, in which case you can put these counters on the map to act as supply dumps. And so you could just anywhere that is in your supply network, you can put one of these supply dumps, and then that will supply units according to a normal supply route from it. Now, what's the point of that, you might think? It's, well, for a start, you could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes from your rail line, put a supply dump, and that means other units can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes further away. Don't forget, on the Pacific map, those distances are halved and rounded up. But anyway, so there you've extended their supply, but you have to pay that supply. So that supply will last, 1 point of it will last up to or equal to 5 units. Or, as we said before, you can pay 1 point for 1 unit as its attack supply and its regular supply. So you could do that here in the reorganization phase as well. So 1 point will supply 5 units. That's ships, planes, or land units. So potentially, you could put a supply near here. It's near a port. You could have a boat go out of the port, a couple of land units, and a couple of planes. That's 5 units. Maybe doing different things, but that expend that supply dump, and they would be in supply for this part of the reorganization phase, which means they would be in supply for the whole turn, except for the exploitation phase, not necessarily in that phase. That would depend on if I guess that that's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that when I was preparing this. So I'd just add a sort of brackets here. I'll just check the rules quickly. Yes, it says nothing in the rules, but common sense tells you if you have spent that supply, so to put everyone in regular supply in this reorganization phase, it would not be there to supply them again in the exploitation phase. However, another common sense might tell you that, well, they were in supply even though they were out of the net, the national net, at the beginning of this reorganization phase, so why not in the exploitation phase? Well, because you check again in the exploitation phase. So I think you would have to have another one of these to pay for exploitation units. In fact, I'm sure that's the case. So that's the supplementary or marker supply dumps that you place on the map. One point to note about that is that where can they be placed? Well, in my example just now, I chucked it in the middle of nowhere. That's not actually fair, because you have to place it on a city or an airbase. Now every city is considered to have an airbase. You can also build airbases. So if you had built an airbase in there and the airbase is in supply, you could put the dump there. You could also put it on a headquarters unit. Again, the headquarters has to be in supply, but there you can put your dump there. Now the good thing about this is that the headquarters unit can then move and it takes the supply with it. There's no limit to how much supply a headquarters can carry. Also, boats can carry this supply markers overseas, put them in new ports, and bombers can also carry supply as well. 1 point for long bombers, 2 point for long range strategic bombers. So that's a way of extending your supply by strategic dumps, but that is finite. These are expended the same as attack supply. Now, another point to make with this supplementary or marker supply is that it's a bit different on the Pacific map or even on the European theatre if you have one hex island. So not any island, but only one hex islands. They conceivably might, let's have a look at the map here. I mean, say you've got this, oops, excuse that there. Say you've got this situation in the Pacific and you have a few Japanese units, very weak garrison units scattered around the islands. You do not want to put a dump of one supply to supply just one unit for one turn. So what the rules allow is that in these single hex islands, so it could be a bunch of islands, but they only fill one hex, 1 point of marker supply will supply one unit for 5 turns. And you simply record that with, you drop the supply down and either above or below, it doesn't matter, you put one of these blue hits. Okay, 5 turns, after when it's down to 3 turns, then down to 2 turns, 4, okay, you get the picture. So you record the supply like that. So these fellows could have their own supply with them that would last them for 5 turns. That supply is only for one unit, so it could not also say supply a boat or an aircraft counter in the same hex. You could say put 3 points of supply there and it could supply 3 units for 5 turns. Which brings me, I think, to the last main type of supply and the last complete type of supply, which is minor source supply. Now, when you're checking units at the end of your turn, before exploitation but after combat, for out, you're checking your out of supply units to see if they might be eliminated. You can have this special kind of minor source supply. So essentially what this is for is that units that might be cut off from the major supply, home supply network, but when they're not being bothered by attacks, they're kind of like outpost units. They just have like a trickle of standard supply from any city. But it's only effective for all units within 5 hexes of that city, as long as there are no enemy units within 10 hexes of the city. So as soon as an enemy unit comes within 10 hexes of that city, or is it of that unit, those units? Let me just check. Yes, sorry, that's right. As long as no enemy unit comes within 10 hexes of those units, so it could be potentially up to 15 hexes away from this city, any city, those units will be able to resist. They will be out of supply if they didn't get any regular supply at the beginning of the turn, but they would not be eliminated. You would not need to check them for elimination at this point of the turn. So you can see that would save like minor units from being eliminated, and you could keep outposts going, although they would be at reduced attack and defence and movement capabilities for as long as they're only surviving on that minor source supply. The last point to make is that this minor source supply is a bit different on those 1 hex islands. On 1 hex islands, it would so say there's no supply dump on these islands, but these islands do not have a city, so you cannot have any city here, but their minor source supply comes from the fact that there is an air base on that city. So if you have placed an air base, then this unit will be a minor source supply. So he would be, for example, out of supply if you hadn't supplied him with any markers from your supply dumps. However, he would not be checked for elimination and that end turn check, not now at the reorganisation phase. As long as there's no enemy land unit comes and invades his island, if you have an enemy land unit invading, then at the end of that turn, even if he had survived the combat, you would have to check him for hits, and he might well be eliminated from being out of supply. So that's the land unit. If, say, you had an aircraft unit, have I got any handy? No. Well, if you had an aircraft unit on that island too, it would also be a fine, and it could normally, if you're out of supply, I forgot to mention this before, yes, if naval or aircraft units are out of supply, regular supply, then they can only rebase or transfer, as they call it, for naval units. So they cannot perform bombing or attack missions or anything like that. However, if you're an aircraft on minor source supply on an island like this, then you can perform patrol missions. But normally but only to search. Normally in patrol missions you could attack. But here's an aircraft. But these patrol missions would only enable you to search for enemy ships. So that's a helpful thing, because say you move out some hexes away, within your search register you find some enemy ships. You couldn't attack them, but there could be naval ships nearby which would be able to intercept them according to your information. So that's a way to use the one hex islands in the Pacific, and perhaps there's some on the European map, I'm not sure. Even though you have not got full supply and you can't afford to pay, you haven't got regular supply and you can't afford to pay supply markers for them. So I think that's everything I have to say about supply in general. Now I should get back to the rest of the organisation segment, because remember, that was only really about regular supply checks in the reorganisation phase, and possibly supplemented units that are not within regular supply. So going back to the reorganisation phase, we find that the next point we have to do is repair hits on land units. Now I thought I'd better just come back to say a couple more things. I've been quite comprehensive on describing supply, as was my intention, because I don't really intend to come back to it later in the instructional videos. So although it might come up at specific points relating to other phases and actions, this is basically everything about supply you need for the games in this point. So I've inserted it here in the reorganisation phase just as a convenient point. With that in mind, there's just a couple more things that I should mention that might be questions at the back of your mind. One is that I forgot to say the effect of attacking without paying for supply. Say you don't have any to pay in your pool, or you don't want to pay, well then your units are just at half attack and defence value. That's your choice. Another point to make is that the supplementary or marker supply that you put down on the map, and you can move around in the headquarters by bombers or by naval units, you can also pick it up from the map if it's within your supply network and move it to somewhere else in your supply network if you so wish. So you know, if you'd sort of put it down there, that's in supply, great, and then next turn you think, oh, I don't need it there anymore, I'll put it down here even. That's that's great, you can do that, but one thing you cannot do is pick it up off the map and put it back in your pool. So once you put it down, it's on the map, you must spend it or carry it, or it's wasted. Now, one point to notice with that, which we'll come to later, is that your units, if they're in a hex and you have supply there, you can sabotage it. You can spend movement points and destroy some of that so that the enemy will not capture it. That could be helpful later on. One more point to make, and this is about that minor source supply that I mentioned last. Say you have your one hex island group there, and they've got an airbase, so they're out of these units are out of supply. Actually, there's another point to make here. When you mark out of supply with land units, you flip them. With air and sea units, you cannot flip them because their reverse side shows an aborted state. I don't know if you can see that here. There's a tiny A down there, and that aborted state is relevant to another sort of game convention. So you mark out of supply for air and naval units with an empty oil drum. So say these units were out of supply, and as I said, they've got an airbase, so they're in minor source supply. We do not check them for elimination at the end of the turn, and the aircraft can patrol for searches only. Now, if an enemy unit came into the hex, that minor source supply is negated. It's not like the minor source supply on land, whereby, say, an enemy unit, in this case a naval unit, came within 10 hexes. So you could have enemy naval right up to here. It doesn't matter. The unit has to be on your hex to negate that. And one hex island minor supply sourcing. So that's the end of supplies descriptions, and so it's a bit dim here, it's just my lighting, and then we'll go back to the reorganisation phase with the repairing hits on land units next. The next part of the reorganisation phase concerns repairing hits on land units. Now you repair these hits with replacement points from your storage pool. I mentioned earlier in the supply section that you have an off-map storage pool. Here it is. The countries I have marked here are Japan, China, you have nationalist and communist. Then I divided this section to the USSR, Great Britain and USA. And in the first box it's marked at the top replacements. You also have material and supply. Here are the supply counters that you will be using to let me get a better look at this for you. Okay, so here are the supply counters that you would be using to pay for attack supply or for supplementary marker supply. There's also spaces for marking down hulls which have been built prior to building the rest of the ship, and for partisans. But we're concerned here now with the replacements. And when you repair hits on land units, that's infantry or armour, you take one of these replacements, you spend it, and that will enable you to take a hit off, just say I'm looking at the Chinese here now, you'll be able to take a hit off a land unit. The unit has to be in supply, it doesn't have to be withdrawn from the front line. So if the unit could be in contact with the enemy, it could be this unit, it could be a unit anyway, as long as they are in supply, you can, in this case that would be one replacement would replace one hit on a normal infantry unit. If the units are special, like Marines, mountain units, paratroopers or armour, then it will take 2 replacement points to replace one hit. So that is repairing hits on land units. I don't think there's anything more to say about that. No, I believe not. So the next point to look at is the rail movement. Now rail movement is it's kind of like a strategic movement that occurs before the movement phase. Anybody who moves in rail movement can still move during the movement phase. Essentially, the unit can not go into an enemy zone of control, so it can't move into an enemy zone of control, and it can't move through an enemy zone of control by rail movement. But say for the sake of argument, this is a rail hex as well. In the rail movement, this unit could be anywhere. It could be, as long as it starts on a rail line, and there's another point as well, but I'll get to that. So it could be here. It can have infinite movement along rail lines, and it can go right up to here, because these are friendly units to the Japanese. So the enemy unit zone of control is negated, and there he has performed his rail movement. Sorry, I'm trying to get focus. So he could also, if the railway continued down here, he could move all the way down here using rail movement, as long as it's not an uncontested zone of control or as long as it's an enemy zone of not in an enemy zone of control. The other point to make, which is interesting, is that say the unit started here at the beginning of the turn, and you want it to move in by rail movement. Well then, say it's clear weather, and this is the Pacific map, so that would cost him 1, 2, 3, 4 points to get there, and then he can be moved by rail movement now. So what you essentially do is you spend his movement points now, and put one of these, one of the blue markers, so it's not like a hit marker, but it's a construction marker or other kind of reminder marker, to say he spent 4 movement points. So, so he spent 4 movement points. His movement value, as it happens, is 4. So he won't be spending any more in the movement phase, but then you can move him by rail. If, say, he had started, let's say here, that would only have cost him 2 movement points. And so we would then move him by rail and, whoops, move him by rail and then mark him with 2 there. So that says that in the movement phase coming up, he will have 2 movement points less to spend. You can see I've got quite a war going on here in China. Big stacks, lots of markers. Anyway, that's the point of that. Oh shoot, I can't remember where he was. I think he was there now, wasn't he? Okay. So much for rail movement. So that's so much for rail movement. The last point to make of it is that each nation has a specific number of units they can move by rail. So for example, the Japanese only have 1, but then they have the bonus of being able to move round 1 within their occupied parts of China. So you need to check that within the rules for here the country's rail capacity. You can later on in the turn you can produce extra capacity of rail movement should you so wish. Now the next point in the turn to notice is rebase aircraft, and that's simply what it says. I won't go to the map to show you that, it's quite obvious. Essentially an aircraft can move double its normal movement length into another friendly airbase, and that happens now in the reorganisation segment, so it does not negate the aircraft from performing missions at the later on in the turn. At this point also, aircraft that were out on a patrol previously in the last turn may be returned to base, and they are flipped over to the aborted side, so they cannot perform missions this turn. They were busy returning from their patrol. The final bit to note is engineers finish installations. Sorry, just a clarification before we go on. In the rebase airbase segment, patrolling aircraft that were patrolling at sea return to base at this point. So they have to return to base after patrolling at sea. next turn, and they're not available for actions this turn. That will be important, I guess, later on. Oh, hang on, sorry, I thought I was recording, I wasn't. I'm just going to quickly do this again. So engineers finished installations happens like this. This is an engineer. I've marked my engineers with a strip of blue around the edge just so that they're more visible to distinguish them from the regular troops. So here, this engineer would have been working on this fortress. You might be able to see there's like a spade, a shovel there with a, on the back of the fortress marker. So he would finish that fortress. It only takes a month at this point, and now it's ready. It will be active for the rest of this, from now on, for the rest of this turn and onwards. So that engineer has finished that installation. You might get a situation like here where you have engineers working on a fortress. Installations are, I think, just air bases, fortresses, and forts. This is a fortress, and it takes 6 months to build. Normally, that is. So normally you mark it. You will mark it with 5 months to go, 4 months to go, etc. as the months go past in this segment. One thing just to note is that I actually have 2 engineers here on this hex. So what that means is that something that normally takes 6 months to build only takes 3 months to build. It's also important to remember that at this point, if say you are completing a month of term extended construction, don't forget to pay the material cost for that month of construction. Normally you would pay the material cost for this fort when you first put the counter down, I guess. So that is, I believe, everything that needs to be said for the reorganisation phase of the movement turn. That happens in one side's player turn. I hope the video has been helpful, and the next video will be on the naval phase.